Hi, welcome to episode number 5 of Lean Coffee Talk. I'm co-host Mark Graban, joined by
Jamie Flinchbaugh. How you doing today, Mark?
I am doing well. We're recording this on a Friday midday, so it's always a good time for coffee. Earlier part of the day than when we used to do whiskey.
Right. It's a big contrast in timing for most people between coffee and whiskey, but not everybody.
Yeah, it gives us more leeway of when to record these. So we're here, and your t-shirt's going to tie, or not your t-shirt. The shirt that you're wearing is going to tie into one of our first topics. My t-shirt is going to tie into something we'll talk about a little bit more at the end. We have more people listening than there are watching, so I probably didn't even need to bring it up. But you've got a pattern, some logos on your button-up.
Yeah, it's my Lehigh, sort of Hawaiian shirt with a bunch of the old buildings, the stained glass window, and the Lehigh logo. So a bit of a strange shirt, but headed to a art gallery thing later today, and this is a fun shirt for me. So it's a new shirt, but thought it was the best Lehigh shirt I should wear for an art gallery, or I don't know if it's an opening. I actually don't know much about it other than art gallery and Lehigh.
And you're going, or you were told to go, perhaps. But for those who don't know, Lehigh is not just your alma mater. This is very much a Flinchbaugh family connection, right?
Yeah, my wife and I met there, and have one graduate kid and 2 kids there now, a senior and a freshman. So we will see probably one of them later today when we're on campus. But yeah, very much a family school in a lot of ways.
Yeah, lots of connections there. That's cool. I am wearing a T-shirt that says clearly on top the logo of the band Spinal Tap, the real band that was in a kind of fake documentary that's also a real band, and that's kind of a confusing history. But this shirt, we'll talk more about it later. This shirt in particular is kind of a fake retro shirt for those who know the movie. This is Spinal Tap. One of their albums, not well received by the critics, was called Shark Sandwich. And this is a T-shirt supposedly from their 1980 tour to support Shark Sandwich. That's an album that doesn't exist in a tour that didn't happen, but thanks to somebody, a creative person on Etsy, that you can buy this fake retro T-shirt.
Yeah, and convince people you were there.
I mean, it's a real T-shirt. So this is where it's a little...
It's not a real tour, but just convince people you were there, and they weren't there to see that you weren't there. So who knows? But
yeah. But we'll talk about Spinal Tap later on. They call that a teaser in the industry. Maybe not the best teaser, but we'll come back to that. So today's coffee selection, I guess we'll move on to that, is not so much about the preparation or the beans or the method, but it's more about the vessel. So tell us about the theme, and tell us about yours.
So this whole episode is going to be a little bit of throwback in terms of back to the 90s, etc. But so my cup is my oldest cup, which is from an internship at the Energy Research Center at Lehigh University. I worked on a research project on macrobiofouling control with boundary layer theory, and we don't have to get into the science of that. That'll get
please. I don't even understand the words you used, but okay.
Some of not fun for everybody, but yeah, I did an internship there. Walked away with a mug, oldest mug I happen to have in my house that I would drink out of. So. So yeah, that's my retro mug, and just on the vessel, right, of coffee does matter, right? A lot of people drink out of paper, mm-hmm. And I always hated the styrofoam, even though I had lots of styrofoam coffee.
We talked about bad coffee last time. That was usually consumed in a styrofoam cup.
Yeah, those go hand in hand, but the vessel matters, whether it's the mouthfeel of the coffee, the retention of warmth, or the sentimental. Every time I use this mug, I think a little bit about when I got it, and same with my Leaders for Manufacturing MIT mug. So a lot of these mugs can have a little bit of sentimental or aesthetic pleasing moments, and it matters. So
yeah.
So that's what I'm drinking out of. What do you have for us today?
Well, I'll share, but I was going to ask you before we hit record. You transferred your coffee from an interesting, unusual brewing vessel and storage vessel into this.
Yeah, so I like doing. I like espresso the most. I'll do pour overs, and I thought pour over was a good thing. So I have this new Mir, I believe it's how it's pronounced, pour over canister carafe. That I think even when they advertise it, they're like, you will hand this down to your kids.
It's like one of these solid metal water bottles that people.
Yeah, it is solid, and I basically got it because I wanted good coffee at tailgates, because I generally start early, and so this year I got this to do pour over coffees at tailgates. And I thought a glass pour over carafe, probably a bad idea. So I bring my scale, I bring my hand grinder, bring my beans, and bring my carafe.
How do you heat the water over a grill?
So I have done that. Done that, but actually, our friend has a Ford Lightning pickup truck.
There you go.
With tons of power, right? Tons of power outlets. So I actually bring an electric kettle to heat the water. So we could do a little fire pit, and but this is the most secure way to make sure it gets done. So
yeah. Well, fancy coffee for a tailgate. My alma mater, Northwestern, gets a not completely unfair rap as the tailgates being a wine and cheese crowd, as opposed to your typical beer and brats crowd. I mean, look, I've seen all of that and smelled or tasted all of that at a Northwestern tailgate. But my mug, because we planned ahead, the theme of an old mug. I was going to use my now almost 30 years old Northwestern 1995 Big Ten champions Rose Bowl participants coffee mug. I was going to bring that from Texas back here to Kentucky, and travel plans were disrupted. My wife broke her ankle a month ago, and so we ended up not traveling back. But I have, I think, a pretty cool mug that's special to her.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to use today, because we had it here. This is a rather vintage Miss Piggy Muppet Show mug.
That's awesome.
See, drawing of late 70s kind of variety Miss Piggy, as Miss Piggy has evolved. My wife is a huge fan of the Muppets, and in particular Miss Piggy. The copyright date on the mug is 1978.
Wow.
I think I acquired this on eBay maybe a decade ago.
Okay.
So it's been in the household for a while, but I think the mug is actually 47 years old.
Yeah.
We'll call it.
And we're big Muppets fans as well. So not that I think we have a box set that we would pour over at some point of that. But yeah, that's vintagey. And I do drink more espresso. So when we end up in a antique shop or something, I'm always looking for an espresso cup that I would like, right, and also isn't leaded or anything. But I haven't really been looking at the coffee mugs, and I probably should. Well, we don't need any more coffee mugs.
Right? No, we get too many. They're gifted to you, right? I'll give a shout out to a relatively new podcast I was a guest on, and I'm going to recommend they reach out to you, Jamie. It's called the Improvement Nerds podcast. Mark Ryan, the host of that. So he sent me, it was an Improvement Nerds t-shirt. Oh gosh, what was on the mug? It was not their logo, but it was a funny kind of improvement nerd. I'll maybe next episode I'll use
Sounds
that
good.
mug and show it off. So check out the Improvement Nerds. We kind of bandied around. Remember when we were kind of thinking about rebranding, reframing lean
Yeah.
whiskey? I think I had brainstormed just different phrases of like, improvement nerds, improvement geeks. And I'm glad we didn't end up in a conflict or duplicate names or
Well,
something.
I'm sure we would have done a search first, but yeah, I think we had lean nerds and lean geeks and all sorts of versions around that. Um, I could apply for coffee snobs. So
Yeah.
there's lots of things. I think we even toyed with grumpy old lean men or something like that. But I'm not sure that made it to the top 5. But we had lots of ideas. But
Yeah, there's lots of brainstorming, and I'm glad we did the coffee theme. And I'm by the way, I'm drinking just a machine-made Americano from our kind of automated grinder espresso machine.
there you go. Americano works for me, and yeah, mine's just a pour over with some locally roasted beans from a company I like to go to. So yeah, that's what's in my cup.
Yeah,
For
I'll
now.
give a shout out to my locally roasted espresso beans from Carabello Coffee here in Newport, Kentucky. Nice local coffee shop. If you're through the area again, we'll have to go because they do all of the normal espresso coffee shop, pour over, cold brew, the whole range of things. But they have an area that's only open from like afternoons into evenings. It's like they call it their coffee lab.
Okay.
And so they will do events where you can do like comparative tastings and learn about coffee. They have a license to do, coffee cocktails
Okay.
in
Nice.
different fun things, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic. So good
Great.
place, Carabello Coffee.
Yeah, my beans are from a roaster called Toasted and Roasted, and it's a tiny little shop, and they have no seating inside. So it's a roastery elsewhere, and then they sell the beans there, and then they are a coffee shop. But they have some. It's in Bethlehem, and they have some tables out on the sidewalk. So when I get in there to get some beans, I'm like, yeah, I'll have a espresso or a macchiato, and just sit on the sidewalk. Old school. Sit on the sidewalk, watch all the traffic go by, drink my macchiato, and then hit the road with my couple of bags of beans. So
yeah. But see, we're geeking out on coffee and methods and places and products just like we used to back in the old theme. So there we go. There's our transition.
And so yeah, the geek talk will. It really doesn't matter what the topic is. It does it. We'll go deep and we'll go down the rabbit hole and we'll enjoy the journey of whatever we decide to explore.
We went deep enough on the energy thing. No follow up questions. I don't know.
No follow. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna talk about some things from the '90s to today. Things have changed, and we'll talk about some companies as well as sort of the lean journey about some companies that were really strong in the '90s that are trying to make a comeback or trying to find their old magic or whatever that might be,
or reinvent or all of the above,
or reinvent or all of the above. So so that's where we're going to start, and so since this is lean coffee, we're going to start with Starbucks.
Yeah, we've talked about Starbucks, and what we may reference back to that a little bit. But there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. We'll link to it in the show notes that caught our eye. We both read that. The headline says, "Starbucks abandons mobile order pickup only stores." The subheadline says, CEO Brian Niccol says grab and go coffee houses are overly transactional. Now, this is the second new Starbucks CEO that we've talked about in the past year.
Probably, yeah. The first one didn't make it.
We talked about the previous CEO who made a big deal about, and I think we appreciated. He went and got trained as a barista before he formally started as CEO, and You
Yep.
know,
It was the right thing to do. He made maybe a little too much hay out of it, but some of that could be the media or the PR people doing that for him. But
mhm.
yeah, it seemed like the right thing to do. And now we're on to another, outside CEO, Brian Nickel,
Who came from Chipotle,
came from
right?
Chipotle, who had their own, rise to fame and success and growth. And so this idea of, mobile order pickup only stores going away and being transactional, I mean, in Starbucks Rise, there was a big deal about them being the third place destination. That was
Comfy
the
chairs, yeah.
yeah. So you go home, you go to work, you go to Starbucks, and that was your third place destination. And I have to say, back in those days, it was for me. I would go there for meetings. I would go there to write. I wrote a good chunk of the Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean at a Starbucks because they didn't have Wi-Fi back then.
Focus.
And so, I was at a coffee shop the other day. They said this is a laptop-free zone. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Starbucks has Wi-Fi. I've been to other coffee shops, so they very specifically don't have it.
Yep. And that's fine. I know I don't even know the name of the show, but my wife was watching a show, and the shop owner, promised he would he'd give out a Wi-Fi password, and it was actually wrong. And it's really because he didn't want people. He didn't want to tell them, I don't want you hanging out here on your laptop, but he'd keep giving out wrong passwords.
I read a funny thing on social media. I don't know if it's true. It probably is, but that somebody went into a coffee shop and asked for the Wi-Fi password, and they were told, you have to buy a cup of coffee first. So they bought a cup of coffee, and they said, okay, well, will you give me the password now? And they said, all lowercase, you have to buy a cup of coffee first.
That's great. So, I think this is a big question of value, right, for Starbucks. Yeah. And, the idea of value of coffee, it's the drink. We've already talked about the vessel. That's part of it. It's the ambiance of the place you're at. It's the people you might be with or might not be with. Sometimes you want to go there to be alone for a little bit. And it's the smile and brief conversation with the barista. All of those things are factors. Some people value all of it. Some people value, just one component of it. And I think Starbucks is making a claim that we want you to at least value the interaction and the environment a little more than just popping in, looking at your phone and grabbing a drink.
And I think part of the difficulty is that different customers define value differently.
Absolutely.
And they can't really tell us what to value, I would argue, but they should understand for those different types of customers, can they accommodate the people that want to be transactional? In some ways, Starbucks has trained us to be transactional, mobile apps. The one thing I notice sometimes is that the baristas seem so busy or even overburdened. And I've read in the past how Starbucks has like a lot of quick service restaurants and retail. They have, very strict labor standards and limits and budgets, like to the point, I remember maybe it was a decade ago when they started introducing pastries. That sounds like crazy. Like, what do you mean they didn't have pastries? Well, they didn't. And there was a news story about how if they hit the warming button on the cash register, like if you got a croissant and that it was going to be warmed, there was a labor budget allocation that came from that. And so the allegation, this is what happens. The baristas learned to always hit the warmed button, even if the customer didn't want it warmed, because that boosted their labor allocation. So it seems like the company's being super transactional with the baristas.
Oh, 100%. And efficiency and speed was really the name of the game. And they, to be fair, they're not getting rid of mobile order pickup coffee. They're just getting rid of the stores that's all they do.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think when I've been in one of those locations. Yeah, no, I think I have, as I'm jogging my memory. But it said, there were only 80 or 90 of those locations. And to me, I think it's very much like the kiosk that you might see in a grocery store. It's
Right.
not really a full-blown Starbucks. There might be 2 tables, but it's really, you grab it on your way in to shop, you grab it on your way out. And Brian Nickel, the CEO, is quoted as saying, we found this format to be overly transactional and giving the warmth and lacking the warmth and human connection that defines our brand. And I'm thinking, like, what if these busy office workers don't give a crap about the brand? They want quick coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see, there's a time and a place for a location that's going to be very drive-through centric, and some that are going to be more like, I don't know, Central Perk on the show Friends back in the 90s. That was a very classic third place kind of setting.
Yes, of course. The number of times they didn't even order a coffee was disturbing. But, but so the question is closing the stores really about affecting those customers or affecting the message to the rest of Starbucks management, both local and both distributed and central, to say, we're going to be about the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Dunkin' and others can have the people that really just want to get a coffee. We'll still have places that do that, but we want to start making decisions, right? So one of the ways you signal to your employees what's important is your decisions and actions. And so if you're telling your management to start making decisions that focus on value and experience and ambiance and things like that, then closing these stores doesn't really affect Starbucks, but may affect the culture. And I don't know that's why he did it, but it's if he has a strong message that that's how we want to make decisions, then he would be a little hypocritical to say, unless we're making money.
Well, yeah, and this is where we don't know for a fact how much of this decision was the CEO's or how much of this is the CEO being the face of the decision in an earnings call. But there is, and we talked about it previously in an episode about the previous Starbucks CEO, the Uber CEO. There's this kind of this trope of, the genius CEO swoops in and sees problems that the local store managers and frontline employees didn't see. And I'm like, that's probably not true. It's just they might not have mechanisms for people to either be empowered or to escalate those problems. And so I have a bias toward the CEO's role being to create culture and systems that allow everybody to participate in improvement or innovation. And there might be some decisions that bubble up to the CEO that might be big enough to require the approval of the CEO or the C-suite. But I think the idea that the CEO magically comes in, and I think that sends a bad message to other CEOs of like, there's nothing wrong with going to the stores and interacting with the front line, but I think there's a difference between going into the stores to listen and to show appreciation and respect versus I'm going to come in and fix it. Yeah.
And we always have to recognize, right, these are people are writing stories for, readership and, as we think about, what's a fun story? He listened to people and took their ideas, or he was a hero, right? Mm-hmm. And so some of it's how we tell the story, and some of it surely is ego and other things that come with even the willingness to do that job, because it's a hard job. But yeah, I think there's no way these are all original ideas. Mm-hmm. Somebody in the company had them. Somebody in the company voiced them at some point. Mm-hmm. But it is a matter of putting them together in a cohesive way. And I think there's probably, if you're really looking for the CEO to make the decision, I think really good CEOs make very few decisions. Mm-hmm. Mostly make people decisions, support those people. Yep. Connect the dots and things like that, enable people to do things. But they make decisions where, again, you need the positional power and authority to do it, or it's again to affect culture, to affect the organization, to make a statement more
Right.
so than the decision itself.
Yeah. I mean, there's, strategic decisions such as back in the day, Starbucks had to decide, do we license the name to these different locations where it says, we proudly brew Starbucks, whether that's a Barnes and Noble cafe or hotel, coffee shops, does that dilute the brand if they're not performing as well as a full-blown true Starbucks location, or strategic decision to enter Italy as a market? Like, yeah, good luck with their coffee shop culture and espresso bar culture. I think Italy has kind of resisted or not really embraced Starbucks. Maybe there's enough Americans visiting that that's
There's
their market.
plenty of tourism, but yeah, we also have to, some of the middle management, even senior management, inertia and barriers to decisions, right? So let's just using that, we proudly brew Starbucks. There's probably somebody that's, president or vice president of that division.
Sure.
And they're not going to say, hey, I think we should close my division. Why would they ever do that? It's a really hard, they might say, hey, I think I should trim this 20% of my division, but yeah, I think we should get out of what I'm here to do. Very hard decision to make for that person. And of course, their peers aren't going to go, I think we should close, Bob's department. That's just going to invite other stuff. So sometimes,
depending on how competitive and cutthroat the culture is, they might.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
there's definitely some cases where that happens. So sometimes you need the CEO to cut through that stuff. But every decision that a CEO makes signals to the organization what kinds of decisions they're allowed to make and not allowed to make. And so there will be times, just in some of the CEOs I advise, they find themselves in a situation where they have to make a decision that they don't want to be theirs, but it needs to be made, either because somebody else isn't making it, and they're stuck, or there's a cultural hang up or a structural hang up. And so we talk about how to frame it of, this is not me changing the decision rights. It's me making an abnormal decision outside of the decisions I normally want you to make. That's probably not the wording they're going to go use, but fundamentally, we're kind of watching, if you kick every decision upstairs and kind of go, well, what do you think, boss? Well, then that's going to start a dynamic, and we're just going to say the CEO makes all the decisions.
And the employees get dependent. It breeds some dependence if the CEO allows that, right?
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? The employees will, I don't say take advantage of it, but they will provide themselves cover by kicking decisions upstairs, and then rather than push it back, CEOs and executives at all levels can take that moment, make the decision, and now we've set a pattern, right? And that takes a long time to undo culturally.
Yeah. One other thing that was in the article, I've experienced it as a customer, that was framed as a CEO decision, was going back to handwriting things on the cups, and back to Starbucks choosing to be more transactional or efficient. The process used to be, you give your name, they write the name on the cup with a marker. But I think a lot of the communication about what the order was, like they may have marked something, or there may have been some sort of handwritten, like extra shot or something. I'm trying to remember that era. But they went to a printout sticker that gets put on the side of the cup, and it contains all of the drink information. Like if I order for my wife a pecan oat milk cortado, only 1 pump of syrup, all of that's on the cup. And that probably increases order accuracy. I would hope. But then, this big push of back to being more relationship focused and charming or whatever. They're now either writing, not necessarily your name, because they didn't get rid of the sticker,
right?
But now you get like a smiley face or like a heart Or one day it said like, "You're awesome." I'm like, well, that's kind of making a leap and an assumption. Thank you, but you don't know me. It felt, feels a little disingenuous, or they're doing that, and frankly, I don't value that. And I read online, one of the Reddit's subreddits, where a lot of Starbucks employees are. They're like, back to the labor standards. We get 3 seconds of labor allocation for the time it takes take the cap off the Sharpie and put it back on. And I'm thinking, like a manufacturing guy, I'm like, why isn't the Sharpie just hanging on a little retractable pull cord? And how long can you leave the cap off without it drying out? Like, come on, you can. But
you cost 75 cents, so just buy a gigantic box of Sharpies and throw them away at the end of the day. But
yeah. And then somebody was joking, like, "Oh, we should just go buy a rubber stamp," and then we. But there's this debate around, we're busy, if not overburdened, especially during rush times. And like, frankly, I don't give a crap if they write anything. I appreciate it when the store manager at my local location looks at me with a smile and says, "Hey, you're in." I know, just that you're in here a lot. Hello. Or when the staff actually have the free space in their work to say welcome in, instead of just being super busy scurrying around. I appreciate that. I'd be curious if they've surveyed customers about the handwriting in advance, or now that they're doing it, or do you go with your gut?
You might. I mean, in advance, it's hard to tell because people aren't experiencing it, and they are a data-driven company. I can't imagine they're not evaluating whether people value it now. Now they may be comparing it against a 3-second standard about whether that value is worth it, as opposed to the reality of it. But I mean, I can imagine I'd spend my time on the drive to work thinking about what am I going to draw today, right? Like, I can't draw the same thing every day on every cup. That's going to be insane, and I can't come up with a new thing for every cup. So every day is going to have a new theme, and I'd probably obsess about that. But I'd imagine they are evaluating that today. I could also see, a lot of people valuing that. I could imagine that. I think what I would value more, or the spirit or the chunk of value, the value proposition that I think it's replacing is, it used to be, they call your name and they could hand you a cup, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't have time for that. Even the smaller shops don't have time for that anymore.
My local small shop does that pretty reliably, but they also don't have the mix of the Starbucks has the counter with the letters, and there's all the mobile orders, and
right, and that's part of it, the mobile order mix. But it's so they really don't have the time allocation, or aren't it's not built into the structure to look you in the eye mm-hmm. When you get your coffee, and so this is like, well, it's a proxy for that. It's not maybe a great proxy, but it's meant to. I believe it's meant to be a proxy for the human interaction of actually looking somebody in the eye. Because I've interacted.
I'd rather have them spend 2 seconds making eye contact and smiling instead of 3 seconds with the Sharpie. And I don't know if I believe that's actually 3 seconds. But the other thing that came up in the Reddit discussion was, the official mandate from corporate was to do this when time allows. But then some of the store managers or even district managers are making it a "thou shalt do this" every single time mandate. Maybe they want I don't know if they're getting the labor allocation, whether they do it or not. And again, like, there's that micromanagement of the time that even as an industrial engineer, like, yes, you can do it that way, but I value if it's really worth it.
Yep. Yeah. It's a good understanding of the customer is critical for any of these things. And yes, you have different customer personas and different segments of your customer population. And of course, as ubiquitous as Starbucks is, one of the problems they face is they are trying to serve many masters. Sure. And that's, when they started growing, they had a certain type of person that they appealed to. And that was pretty consistent and allowed them to grow. And then to expand, they expanded the circle and expanded the circle and expanded the circle. And, I mean, it certainly wasn't a favorite place for kids to go to in the 90s, but in the early 2000s, absolutely, because that was dessert for breakfast.
Sugary drinks. Yep.
So I saw many pictures of my kids being little, and I go to Starbucks to work on a Saturday, and they go with me and bring a book and sitting there, reading away with their, sugary drink. So, yeah, and when you reach a certain size, you're trying to appeal to many, many different customers. It's very hard to thread the needle perfectly. I think one of the things that in the value proposition that's really tricky, but when you can figure it out, it adds a lot of value, which is this is the same thing that politicians do around voters, quite frankly, or what are some things that some people are passionate about, but the people that favorably, but the people that don't like it or don't care aren't going to vote with their wallet because of it, right?
Sure.
You're not going to not go because there's a Sharpie on your cup.
I'm not offended by it.
You're not offended by it. You're not going to change your decision, right? But somebody else might love it. And so if that's the case, and we don't know, if that's the case, then they've gone from like to love for one segment of customers without hurting the value proposition for others. And when you find those moments where you can, get some people to love the value proposition without hurting the rest of your customer population, those are fantastic. Of course, it depends on the cost to execute it,
but you're making me think of, back to our shared MIT experience in education 1 year apart, the Kano model of customer satisfaction, which I'm jogging my memory and pulling it up here, even just on Wikipedia, that there are features that are kind of like basic needs and expected. And then there are like delighters.
Yep.
And then there are, on the negative side, there's things that like, don't have to be there and major dissatisfiers, right? So for me, like the basics would be, basic needs would include do my drink correctly and don't make me wait way too long. The delighters might be, a new product or a particularly engaging barista. Like the previous manager at that store, had learned my name and greeted, "Hey, Mark," and greeted me by name right when I walked in. And I guess that's a delighter. It wasn't necessary. I'm not upset that the relatively newer manager, like, she recognizes me. I don't need to be called by name, and but again, but we're all different in terms of needs and expectations and what's basic and what's a delighter. And I think the other thing in the model, the illustration, I think this sounds right. Over time, delightful innovation becomes just another basic need. Like people get kind of accustomed to something that might have seemed flashy at first, right?
They can until they go somewhere else that doesn't have that, and this is a repeated experience. And I follow a barista on Instagram who basically says, stop obsessing about your pour over and smile to your customers, right? Like, it matters for most of your customers. That matters more than the small incremental gain you can get out of perfecting your coffee. And so that's, that's why customer personas is actually pretty useful, as you start to figure out, well, for these customers, it's delighters, but it's not detractors for other people. So therefore it's a good equation, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the cost and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And that's where a smile, a friendly gesture, and maybe again for some people that Sharpie art is a delighter. And again, like you said, I don't know if they have data for it before they did it, but they certainly must today.
Yeah. And maybe before we move on from Starbucks, I'm thinking back to Howard Schultz, who was a founder and longtime CEO, and then he left, and then he came back in. I think this was very much a Howard Schultz, like trying to be chief product development officer thing, where
Yeah.
they started offering like these olive oil drinks,
Yes.
coffee or espressos with olive oil. And I don't know, like when that came out, like the buzz was like, this is really weird. And Howard Schultz was a huge believer in it. And sort of like the fat substitute potato chips that were invented and released in the 90s, like these olive oil drinks were causing gastric distress in a lot of people, to be polite. So I think those pretty well flopped. And I think maybe it was the previous new CEO who pulled the plug on that.
Okay.
But I remember that being at least that sounded like not just a portrayal. I think I remember Howard Schultz bragging that this was his idea, that he pushed it through.
Yep. And sometimes, again, people have an idea, nobody wants to put their name on it, and it takes the CEO's name to get it there. So, but I don't see anything about the olive oil drinks. So it was a very quick, short-lived experiment. So
yeah. So the story behind it. Okay. So back on the start, this is still on the Starbucks website. It was abandoned. It says, eliminating its controversial olive oil infused drinks less than a year after being created. But it says like, it began in Sicily when Howard Schultz was introduced to the daily Mediterranean custom of having a spoonful of olive oil. And it doesn't say they put the olive oil in their coffee in Sicily. So the story continues here. As he sipped his morning coffee, he was inspired to try the two together. So I think he's pretty much claiming he invented this. And I think most everyone else was saying maybe you shouldn't have.
Yeah, right. And again, when you're looking to find new magic, because you've lost the old magic, going back to our theme of, the 90s and their success then to their struggles today, any idea, you need to look anywhere for an idea, and sometimes you're going to land on some duds. So
I'd love to see an accounting of back in the day of General Motors, there's numbers thrown around. It was many, many, many tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars that Roger Smith, the CEO and GM, wasted on their attempts to build the fully automated factory of the future, which was a couple decades ahead of Elon Musk's vision of this. I'd be curious if somebody were to add up, like, how much did they waste in the development and the launch and the marketing and I don't know if anyone sued them because of gastric distress, or I would think that would be a Kano model dissatisfier.
That would absolutely fall into that category. So,
especially when you have to run and get the code for the bathroom.
Yeah. So
sorry about that.
Yeah, we won't solve Starbucks problems today, but they can't go back to the 90s. They have to go from here to wherever they go next, as do other companies. So if we're ready to talk about some other companies that basically were big in the 90s and are still trying to make a comeback. There's some others we're not going to talk about. JCPenney, GameStop, Bed Bath and Beyond, and even I don't know much about it, but Napster was just acquired.
The brand name.
The brand name was acquired for quite a bit of money, I think, to go build a social media or a music social platform or something. I don't know the details, but even Napster may make a comeback. But
in some form.
In some form. So not the same form. So one of those companies is that was ubiquitous in the 90s was AOL.
Oh yeah, dial-up. I think I was in college. I can picture my sophomore year popping one of those AOL free trial discs. It was probably the fall of 1992 into my Dell desktop PC. And even though we had dial-up internet on campus, you could also do AOL. Yep,
absolutely. And it was big and it was so ubiquitous, right? There's a whole movie with Tom Hanks that just uses "You've Got Mail" in the title as the title of the movie, and everybody knows what that means. But what I was kind of blown away by is that they've been supporting dial-up internet since then.
Yeah.
They basically up until just a couple of weeks ago, or no, I'm sorry, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So by the time
September
this episode,
30th.
September 30th, they will finally shut down the last of their dial-up internet.
Yeah.
Which blew me away that it took this long. But the reason they had it going is that a lot of people were still dependent on dial-up internet to get access to the internet. And of course, there are other options today. Even if we talk about satellite access,
Mm-hmm.
you can have it from anywhere. You don't even need to be on the power grid for that. So technically, if you don't consider the price, there is internet available to everybody, one way or the other. But 40 years of operations of dial-up, and finally the usage got so low that they just had to discontinue it.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of, back in the late 90s, there was a lot of business model innovation during the dot-com boom around dial-up. So I did a quick search and I'm remembering, oh, right, Net Zero. Do you remember that service?
Mm-hmm.
They offered free dial-up, but you had to look at ads. They would show you banner ads.
Yep.
And I think it was a very early example of using, hey, if it's free, you're the product. And the customer really was advertisers that could get pretty well targeted ads based on people's browser use. That was probably one of the first versions of that. We take that for granted today, that everything and everybody, and through their cookies and whatnot, they're spying on you and giving you custom content. I wonder how long Net Zero lasted. It said it launched in 1998.
Yeah, not sure. I didn't use that.
Yeah, it was, and really, it peaked for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then broadband became more common.
Yep. Yeah, so AOL, still around, which is, of course, amazing. It looks like Net Zero lasted till about 4 years, so maybe 5. AOL is still around, and just they were still making enough money technically that they were able to support this internet dial-up for all this time. But they absolutely started pioneering a lot of how we interacted with each other on the internet. Right?
Yeah.
Really before, you had other versions. You could say CompuServe was a poor user interface version of AOL.
But, remember Prodigy dial-up.
Yep.
That was when we think tech, we think Sears. Like Sears and IBM, I think, were the partners in Prodigy. Now, if I remember right, what Sears had was the ability to do in-store promotion and probably give away, sample discs and free trials, and connect with their customers. And we probably anyone of our age remembers all of the AOL CD-ROMs. You'd buy a magazine. You'd be anywhere. You'd get them in the mail. Became quite a nuisance. But I looked up, and between 1993 and 2006, they distributed over 1 billion free CDs. That's a lot. Most of them ended up in the landfill.
Yep.
But then get this: it's claimed that some estimates suggest at the peak, half of all CDs manufactured worldwide had AOL logos stamped on them.
Wow.
And I don't know if that includes all the music CDs and all the computer or just CD-ROMs, but it says CDs manufactured. And I would believe it. Like they were everywhere.
And you start to think about, like an email list, everybody wants to know what's the open rate, like how many people actually look at it or use the email.
Right.
And this is kind of the same version, just on a CD. How many people actually, opened the CD and did something with it? And my guess is quite a few.
Yeah.
and obviously the growth of the internet through that time frame was massive. When we were trying to raise money for a startup we were doing in 98, 99, everybody was saying, well, why don't you do a portal for your business instead of actually making a product? It's like, we're here to make a product. So we probably could have raised money to open up a website or a portal, but that's not what we were there to do. So yeah, AOL, ubiquitous, and helped drive that, and ultimately sort of victim of their own success. Spent their money on acquisitions and the wrong deals, and instead of pivoting with the technology and the use of the internet.
Yeah. And then, they're still around. Yahoo is an example of a company that was absolutely on the forefront and wildly popular, and didn't evolve and didn't pivot, and passed up on some hindsight great acquisitions. Like I think if I remember right, they turned down an opportunity to buy Google.
That sounds right. Yeah.
At what would have been a really, really low price. So,
just like Blockbuster turned down a chance to buy Netflix. So
right. They turned down turned down opportunities. In 1998, they could have bought Google for $1 million.
Although there's very little chance if that happened, Google would be what it is today.
True.
Because
Yahoo couldn't screw it up. And then 2002, they turned down the chance to buy it for $5 billion. But what's the market cap of Alphabet today? And $3 trillion. But again, there's no guarantee that Yahoo wouldn't have screwed that up.
Well, or just it wouldn't have had the spirit and entrepreneurial guidance that it had to become that company. Whether Yahoo screwed it up or it just didn't achieve all of what it meant to achieve. Yeah. So
I think I like the math, the simplistic story of they could have turned 1 million into 3 trillion. But it says here, Google's founders approached Yahoo, offering to sell for 1 million, and the summary here says Yahoo declined, believing their own search technology and directory model was sufficient.
Which maybe based on what they were looking at, it was at that time. Very hard to project the future, and clearly there was a winner.
And Yahoo was trying to build more of kind of an AOL. They wanted you to do Yahoo Mail, Yahoo News, Yahoo Sports, Yahoo. It says here Google was all about, at the time, pointing people to other websites, and Yahoo thought they were going to make more money, I think, keeping people on Yahoo.
Yeah, basically, do you want a closed ecosystem or an open one? And both AOL and Yahoo made the wrong bet. People didn't want a closed ecosystem. They wanted to go out and explore because other people were better at each individual thing. And so being a general store, general stores exist for convenience. You don't need the convenience of everything in one place on the internet because you just open up a new tab. So,
but now Google is disrupting, and this affects people like me with the blog and people that are more professional, news organizations and websites. So, if the original Google model was, we're going to point you to the best sources. For me, I Googled Yahoo didn't buy Google. Old Google would have brought up first, a couple Reddit pages, Yahoo Finance, ironically enough, some Quora.com. Like I could have read, or even just from the headline, I could have gotten it. Now, what's dominating the page is the Google AI overview, which, even though there's a little link here of here's who we're citing, people are pissed because they're not getting the website traffic anymore. And it's like, well, Google is repurposing my content instead of knowing to point people to my content, which has lost ad revenue, which a lot of that ad marketplace is going through Google. Right. So I don't know how that
some of that is, obviously the click-through ads for sure. And I think ultimately this will have to sort out to some equilibrium, because Google knows, and I've heard, I've heard the CEO talk to this, that they know they can't, they don't want to keep people away from those websites. That's not the goal. But a lot of times, as you mentioned, like, looking through the Google search and reading the headlines, doesn't do anything different, right? Mm-hmm. Like that doesn't help the ad revenues and everything else. And so it's really a matter of whether, are you replacing the click-throughs, and can you really entice the right click-throughs at a higher rate? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to figure out. And of course, Google has to play in this space because, I've been using Perplexity's new browser. It's pretty good.
I didn't know they had a browser. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's available for public download. It's called Comet.
Do you have to be a paid user to get that offered to you? Is that why?
Perhaps, because I know they sent me an email saying, "Hey, you have a few free giveaways." So I don't know if it's a beta or just limited use, but others are headed down the same path. Whether it's Meta glasses or OpenAI developing their own phone with everything built in, or the OpenAI Apple iPhone deal, where your Siri's gonna, I don't know what they're really planning, but you kind of assume Siri is going to be replaced or backed by ChatGPT.
Right.
So anyway, down a rabbit hole there. None of those answers. AOL is not competing with Google or Yahoo or ChatGPT or Perplexity at all at this point. They've lost that race.
And people you occasionally see an AOL.com email address, and in some circles there's kind of a stigma. I mean, I feel that way almost. I still use my Yahoo email address mainly just for commercial emails. I don't do a lot of personal email anymore. But then there's some times I'm like, oh, I sound a little bit younger maybe. Well, the fact that I'm using email, maybe that in and of itself makes me sound old, but giving my Gmail account makes me feel like a little bit more millennial instead of Gen X, where AOL is kind of a baby boomer thing.
Kind of a baby boomer thing. Yeah, absolutely. And so Yahoo, I still have a Yahoo account that's really just for like some news alerts, and my Marriott emails go there, and things like that. It's quite frankly, wouldn't even have to check it but once a week if I didn't have to. Maybe for a shipping notice for something to show up, but that's it. I certainly don't use it to communicate with people. It's really it's my junk mail, but stuff I actually need. So,
so you want to continue on our, remember the 90s episode?
Remember the 90s. So, we're going to reflect, since Mark and I were, of course, very involved at this time frame, but what was the lean like in the 90s? And, it's quite different today. And a lot of people want things to be pure, but pure doesn't have to mean, not thoughtful, not evolving. So I think there's good lean and there's bad lean. There's not a moment in time where that's the version that we should all refer to. But in the 90s, a lot of our bad habits, so to call, or the bad vectors of lean were born in that time frame. So you would talk about, lean is mistakenly applied, or
it was the acronym. I don't use it as much anymore, but lame. Lean is mistakenly executed, or lean is misguidedly explained.
That's what it was. So
and it would be things like people saying like, oh well, lean is really all about speed. I would say, okay, that's not lean. That's lame. That's ignoring the safety and quality pieces.
So it's a lot of those vectors and versions started to be born in that time frame, and even to the point when I was starting my consulting company in 2001, I had some really sharp lean thinkers that were either mentors or colleagues of mine basically say, why are you using the word lean? Because it's already distorted and manipulated. And so, you shouldn't use the word lean because it's already messed up. And my argument was, well, let's reclaim it. Let's get it back to where it needs to be. But it was already, there's already plenty of bad versions of it out there.
Or there was just confusion. When I joined Dell Computer in 1999, a lot of the business press would say, oh, Dell is such a lean company. Well, they were just looking at inventory turns. They were just looking at that one measurable. They had very, very low inventory through systemic value stream design. Wasn't as quote unquote lean as it could have been. They pushed inventory back on suppliers. But and Dell certainly wasn't calling what they were doing lean. It was the Dell model. So there's something to be said for just calling it that. But Dell was certainly not inspired by a TPS origins. They were not trying to be the Toyota of the computer industry. They were trying to be the best at the time. They had great flow. There were certain elements of it, but even back then, I'm like, culturally, this is not a lean company. It wasn't one that, generally speaking, engaged employees in much Kaizen. There was a lot of top-down decision making. They emphasized flow at the expense of quality. In a lot of instances, or a lot of the measures were just all about flow and productivity. I remember kind of throwing a fit one day of end of quarter incentives. I'm like, there is not a single metric tied to any of these incentives about quality. And they're like, point taken, duly noted, and nothing happened. So,
So, lean in the 90s, the really the linchpin, the thing that took it from some people reading some books. I forget if I have this.
The Machine That Changed the World was published in 1990.
Yep. And before that, there was other books, right? Japanese manufacturing techniques and
zero inventories
and things like that. But really, the Machine That Changed the World took it from a fringe conversation that some of us participated in to a much broader conversation. It really popularized it, or at least opened people's eyes, especially for the auto industry, because the Machine That Changed the World was a study, a funded study by the auto industry about the auto industry. And to a large part, it reads like that, right? It's not a page turner, but it stoked a lot of our interest, our imagination about what's possible, and made us more curious. There was definitely some things I think that were sort of flawed. Certainly, there were some gaps, some misses, and that's unavoidable. But a little side story about this book is Denny Pauly, who was my co-founder at my old consulting company, and when I was at Chrysler, he was the executive VP of manufacturing, and he's kind of a living legend in the industry for his role in transforming Chrysler. But he was not yet the executive VP. But I don't remember if it was an advanced copy or just a copy that had come out. But Lee Iacocca was CEO of Chrysler and still was pretty quick to change executives when he needed to. And Denny every year took a vacation to Mexico, sit on the beach, and take a little week away. And Lee Iacocca said, "You read this book and let me know what you think." So, Lee said it. You can't wait till I come back. So he took the book with him on his vacation, read it, came back and said, "Here's what I think." And a lot of it was, of course, in support of the book. And pretty much, there was more going on behind the scenes than this, but pretty much on that conversation, Denny replaced his predecessor and became executive VP of manufacturing for Chrysler. And the transformation didn't begin right away. There was some efforts, some starts, some stops, and other problems going on. Partly with the exit of Lee Iacocca, but that book in some ways helped get Denny into the seat
Mm-hmm.
It allowed the Chrysler operating system and this massive transformation to take place. And so, in some ways, I give more credit to someone else reading the book than to me reading the book in terms of its impact on my life.
Well, in the 90s, I think back, some of my recollections and early influences. I was in Northwestern's basically operations management 101 class, taught by Mark Spearman, one of the co-authors of Factory Physics, which has been an incredibly influential operations textbook. That was really, I think, my first introduction to the idea of like, well, this Toyota production system thing is different, pull versus push, and limiting whip, and like what they taught was all well and good, but it was really framing the Toyota stuff as like production scheduling and materials management.
Right.
And then when I got to General Motors, and I'd read Deming before coming into GM, and there were people there that had this broader view of, lean was that, plus other practices and other methods. And then when I got the second plant manager of the two I worked under, who was one of the original GM people that knew me, as I've talked about a bunch of times, like then really, okay, that was really eye-opening about culture and leadership. And then going back to MIT, even though we had the TQM class, which was more about culture and learning and leadership, the stuff taught in the lean classes was very technical. These are technical lean methods. And it took time, or even at the time, I think it took time. How to put it? There were different waves of lean. So like there was the inventory focus. Lean equals Kanban and pull systems and one piece flow and 5S wave. Then there was like a second wave where like, well, now lean is a broader set of systems and take a broader value stream lean. And okay, there's some management things. And then there's a later wave where people are like, oh, okay, well, this is about culture and problem solving and leadership and all of that with the tools. There was those progressions, and I feel like even some of the education I was getting was in fits and starts of moving in that direction, and then sometimes like, oh, okay, we're back to tools and technical methods, and moving along to to more of the management system. I think healthcare, rather than learning from those waves of manufacturing and starting at the latest wave, I think a lot of healthcare went through those same waves themselves.
Yeah, and sometimes it's because, these are the popular books and people say, oh, start with this, even though it was written a long time ago. I mean, my book, Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean, I still think is relevant, but it was written 20 years ago. And I'm not sure I know what I recommend as a first read, but I don't often recommend my own book. And that's just maybe because I don't want to appear,
right,
like it's my word's the only good word out there. But yeah, people go through the journey on their own, and it's very easy to assume that, hey, we've been through these false starts and these gone down these wrong roads that sounded good at the time and hit walls and seen the consequences. And sometimes people have to learn that on their own. It's it's not like the ability to live a healthy lifestyle is the knowledge isn't out there somewhere. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, fringe stuff that's hard to figure out the perfect answer, but, it's not that we don't know it. It's just that we haven't chosen to follow any particular path yet.
Right.
It's like the knowledge doesn't exist. Oh, it exists. It's just, I need to kind of go through these steps to like get to that step. And I think one of the legitimate arguments for that is doing it right is hard.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite quotes about lean from, I think, Suzaki said, lean is common sense after the fact, right?
Mm.
And so
once
you're on the journey, right, once you've learned all these things and applied them and seen how they work, you're like, yeah, of course, this is how it should work. And why is everybody so stupid that they can't see this?
Wow.
And it's like, well, yeah, once you've seen it, once you've done it, once you've gone on that journey, it all starts to make more sense. But you're standing on the other side of the hill. It's hard to appreciate everything that's in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, part of why I've backed off from using that lame acronym is that I don't want to come across as saying like, oh well, all of you are stupid for not getting it. That's where
Yeah.
the book Practicing Lean came from some of those reflections. And thank you again for sharing your chapter and thoughts and reflections. But yeah, it's just it's frustrating sometimes when you see people kind of stuck in more of a 1990s view of
Mhm.
what lean is. I you know somebody say you should always start with 5S. I'm like, well, I don't like always statements, so I'm going to poke at
No.
any always statement. But I think that's an always statement that is worth challenging in particular.
Oh,
People have been
I,
saying that for decades. And like, I don't know if it was true at a point. I really don't think it's true today. I'm not dismissing 5S.
no, but I think I wrote an Industry Week or an Assembly Magazine column that said, "Don't start with 5S."
Mhm.
And it wasn't just to be contrarian. It was that here's the reasons that it's a mistake to do that many, many times. And I think in the 90s, one of the problems is that, you can only learn so much from books. You can, even though as we both talk as authors, no matter what the topic, there's only so much you can learn from books. But there's certainly limited learning you could do from books on lean in the 90s. There just wasn't much stuff, and much of it was limited in either scope or perspective. And so you did most of your learning, well, mostly through application, but that should always be true.
Mhm.
But the more intake learning, you go visit stuff, right? You go see stuff, right? And so, go visit Toyota at Georgetown. There weren't a lot of other options.
Yeah.
Back then it wasn't the sterile, tourism tour that they give today. It's not that sterile, but it's
It's
packaged
gotten
and
more packaged.
yeah,
Yes.
it's by
And,
far more packaged. And back then it was just like, sure, what do you want to talk about
right.
and go see? And
But now they have like professional tour guides.
absolutely, yeah, that's kind of a lot of them are retired assembly line workers and folks like that. But and then we made a lot out of partly because it was closer, but it was also really good. Um, in Jackson, Michigan, there's a company called Mackey, which was Michigan Automotive Compressor Inc.
Mhm.
And if I remember, it was half owned by uh, Denso and Toyota, not
Mhm.
Toyota.
Mhm.
Um, and so its roots were very, very strong, especially on the equipment side. And it was a foundry and assembly for water pumps, or I can't even remember. Well, compressors. That was the main product, I guess.
Mhm.
But it was a fantastic plant, and it was accessible, and it reflected all of it. And it wasn't Toyota, so you were kind of getting it. But when I was at Chrysler, we went there. When I was at DT Energy, we brought the executive team on a tour out to Mackey, and so yeah, going on tours and going to see stuff
Mhm.
was one of the best ways to get some insights that you couldn't get from the books.
Yeah. And speaking of tours, a lot of people came to tour Dell in 1999 and 2000. I was not part of, and so I would do tours part time, and they would try to partner up people, for the right groups. And I got to tour through a U.S. senator, investment banking group, and but then there were a lot of benchmarking manufacturers. I was not part of the group that brought a Toyota group through the factory because they were working at the time. Dell was famous for their 5-day turnaround time. Whether you order one computer or 1,000 computers,
Right.
we'll build it and ship it or get it to you within 5 days. Toyota was trying to do a build to order model on their Solera convertible. It was the Camry convertible made up in Ontario, Cambridge, Ontario, Canada, and they were trying to do a 5-day turnaround on a build-to-order car, and I don't think they ever got that figured out as good as Toyota is at
Yeah.
other things. Like the touch labor time on a PC was like literally 2 minutes
Yeah.
compared to how many hours of touch labor on a car and painting and things that the end-to-end lead time from start to finish through a factory is roughly 2 days, or could be.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah,
Even without a lot of waste or interruption.
right.
Where Adele, once you had the parts on hand to build the computer, kitting the parts didn't take long. Build time was 2 minutes. The software burn-in took the longest of anything, and then you throw it in a box with the mouse and the mouse pad and the keyboard and the manuals, and build order car within 5 days was a bigger challenge. And then I think they started the question: do you really need to do it within 5 days?
Yeah, especially if you throw in Hijunka, which Dell didn't care as much about as Toyota did, just because of the capital involved and everything else. But
Dell was not trying to level their supply chain.
No, they weren't. And Toyota cared.
Keep it till we order it.
Right. That's how they operated. So yeah, those tours were really, really important. And then, there were a handful of consultants, but in a lot of ways, especially in the early 90s, there was really only one. There were more, but they were all shaped off the model of Shingijutsu. Kaizen events, and Awada-san, who was really the primary founder, who I have a picture with. He was a big mentor for me for a long time, and worked with him quite a bit and soaked up everything I could with him. And he worked directly for Taiichi Ohno. So it was about as close as you could get. And he walked around with his interpreter, and he always understood. He understood English fairly well. Didn't really, but he loved the buffer and as well as maybe even the theater of the translator. But yeah, did all sorts of events all over the place, and they were very clear. This was always, this was from the start. They were clear. This is not how you transform your company. This is just how you learn about lean in a rapid form. It was a teaching tool. It was a workshop. It was a learn by doing workshop. But Kaizen events, which I'm not against per se, became, that's the tool, right? We're just going to do that. And I was still amazed how many companies were still using Shingijutsu to run Kaizen events in the, not that they were using them, but they were still using them. It was the same company using them like Boeing was in the 2000s.
And they're still active in the year 2025.
Yeah. And I have no problem being active, but one company using the same consultant to do the same exact work for 20 years probably suggests there's a lack of uptake and learning going on there. But they, so I think, it's not necessarily their fault because it's how the companies adopt what they learn from them, but it wasn't a scalable transformation model.
Right.
And Awada-san was very clear about that. It was just like, we're going to teach you how lean works, and then you're going to go figure out. He literally said to me, I'm like, hey, we did this. Now, how do I get 5,000 people? He's like, that's your problem.
That's your opportunity. You can figure that out, right?
That's maybe how we should say it, but he said, that's your problem. So,
I've heard stories even recently, read things going back to Dr. Deming, who passed away 32 years ago, of, Deming would teach his principles and his things. And then people would ask that similar question. And he'd say, I don't know. I don't run your business.
Yeah. So the idea that it's like, no, we're just here to teach you how to get started and what good looks like, and then you figure out the rest. That was really what they intended. But because companies wanted to believe that they had the entire recipe, it kind of morphed over time. Lost a little bit of that. But so we had some consultants, we had some books, we had tours to visit, and then the rest of us learned by doing, PDSA, lots of experimentation, lots of failures, and learn through blood, sweat, and tears. And that's lean in the 90s. Today, listen to podcasts, hop on YouTube, and 1,000 different courses you can take. And you can go to university, and very few universities won't have some courses on lean at some level to get started. So you you already learned about it before you even graduated. So lots of opportunities, which also means lots of different flavors.
Yeah, and the band Blood, Sweat, and Tears was not real popular in the 90s. They were more of a late 60s and 70s kind of thing, right?
Yeah, a little further throwback.
Yeah. Well, all right. Maybe on that musical note, pun intended.
Yep.
We'll kind of end with our closing cultural share. Yours is a little more sophisticated musically.
Well, maybe.
Maybe. I think so.
Depends on your perspective, but it's I'm a big jazz guy, but I was kind of reflecting on the fact, like, my dad knows more artists than I do, and I'll mention artists, and I'm like, yeah, I'll listen to a playlist, and sometimes I look at what's playing, and sometimes I don't.
You're just enjoying it.
Just enjoying it, and so sometimes, yeah, what song's this? Who's the artist? I don't remember who was on bass. Especially jazz, you have these different ensembles that would get put together, and it's like, oh, it's this great backup, but also does his own stuff. And so I was hearing a song about with basically a jazz flute. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I want more of that. And so this is something that, unless somebody decided to put together this list, it's really hard to Google. So on Perplexity, I basically said, who are some lesser known jazz flute players that I might want to check out? And so they gave me a list. And so I discovered Frank Wess, who plays saxophone and flute. And I said, listen to, this is Frank Wess on Spotify, because they have their own, I assume, mostly algorithm driven compilations around most artists. And it was interesting. I talked to a couple jazz enthusiasts, including my dad. He's like, I never heard of him. And he hopped on, started listening to him. It's like, oh, that was great. And so I love, even if it was AI driven and Perplexity driven, discovering, I'll say new artists, but new to me. And I really enjoy it. I'll probably go back next week and listen to more Frank Wess. I do love going deep these days on a single artist, whether I listen to their discography or just a long playlist focused on a single artist. But yeah, sometimes we discover an artist that we never heard of and find out they're darn good.
And they were not hallucinated. So I'm a bit of a jazzer. I've, played jazz drums throughout my life. I go listen to jazz, one of my favorite forms, especially of live music. Had not heard of Frank Wess. He was born 1922, passed away 2013. So yeah, he's not alive or active today. I'll go listen to some Frank Wess. Your story there was reminding me now of my favorite band. I'm not a metalhead, but this is Spinal Tap from 1984. My favorite movie of all time. The comedy mockumentary. There's a scene in the movie where the band has a gig canceled and they get booked at an Air Force base, and the lieutenant who's hosting them, played by the late great Fred Willard, is talking with him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm a huge fan of your music. I mean, not yours, but the whole rock and roll genre." Yeah, tries telling him. I'm not quite throwing that at you, Jamie, but it sounded reminiscent of like, well, I love the jazz genre, and I'm glad to hear that. That's good.
Yep.
But you'll learn different names and favorites. And all. You scratching your eye? What finger? I thought you were giving me a middle finger.
No.
That was an index finger. So my more recent cultural share is not just a 41-year-old movie, but the sequel that was released last Friday, Spinal Tap II, The End Continues. Not as funny as the original. I mean, they really struck gold with that movie. It's in the National Film Registry. It's in a lot of people's top 100 movies of all time list and top comedies. But if you're a fan, it closes the loop of a band that's 41 years older, getting back together after 15 years to do one final farewell concert.
Yeah.
When they announced the sequel, I was a little worried. It's not as bad as, it's certainly not like Anchorman 2, which I thought was just, an example of a terrible comedy sequel. But that's out there now. This is Spinal Tap 2. If you haven't seen the original, I would say go watch the original. It's on streaming. I bought, this is the new Criterion Collection Blu-ray, remastered sound. And, the best thing, because all the actors are improving.
Okay.
Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Rob Reiner is the director. And, he's actually in the film. The commentary tracks of them improving as the actors is a great commentary track. And then there's also a commentary track of them in character.
Okay.
Watching the film. And there's a lot of bonuses. And then what I might have enjoyed actually more than the sequel was this new book by Rob Reiner and team, citing one of the famous lines from the original film, calling the book A Fine Line Between Stupid and Clever, the story of Spinal Tap. So it's all about how they met and when and how. And I mean, going back to the late 60s, because these guys are all in their late 70s or 81. And then the flip side of the book, which you don't get the effect in Kindle, is kind of a separate book with its own cover on the back called Smell the Book, The Oral History of Spinal Tap. And so I've read this first part. The second part I haven't read, but I've learned there's an audio book. It's them. And I'm like, I think I want to listen to them talking instead of reading what's probably a transcript of them talking. But I did order this online. It is signed by Rob Reiner, which is kind of a cool little keepsake there.
Well, whether you call it classic or not, I mean, 41 years later, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it almost doesn't matter whether it's good or not. It's just part of the experience, right? Like, as you say, close the loop. Just like Happy Gilmore 2, didn't have to be good. It was just.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's not good, but it's worth watching because it's fan service and characters coming back and lots of cameos, and so it's just fun to do. And so when you have this many people that have this fond a memory of this movie 41 years later. And it's almost interesting that it's 41 instead of 40, like didn't nail the anniversary or anything. Right. But you gotta go see it. You gotta go check it out and close the loop on that experience.
Oh, and one thing I was going to say, this is kind of lean startup-y related or entrepreneurship related. When the original film was being pitched to different studios, Rob Reiner was known as an actor at the time from All in the Family, huge celebrity. He had never directed a film before, and it was difficult to get funding because people are like, what do you mean? You're like, what is a fake documentary? Or why are you making a documentary about this band nobody's heard of? Or, music films don't do well. And it just got rejected. They took some of the money that they had, the initial funding, and they went and created kind of a minimum viable product. They created like a 20-minute demo to show people, and like this instead of talking about what we're going to do, we need to show you. And I'm looking forward to diving in. That 20 minutes is on the Blu-ray as a bonus feature. But even when they showed people the 20-minute demo, a lot of people still didn't get it. No, and that's part of the problem if you're doing something innovative. And there's a story of persistence and just not giving up. I think they almost gave up on the vision. They're like, we can't get this funded. Right. But I'm glad they stuck with it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who regret, not investing or not getting involved as it turned out. But even the initial release was kind of a theatrical flop. It made money, but it wasn't later until VHS, home video, that it really became kind of a cult classic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sometimes hard to tell. And of course, the decision makers in those cases are often not the target audience, which makes it, hard to hard to be able to make those decisions. So you need somebody with that vision and understanding of the market to say yes, especially when you're being original. Right? It's easy to say, here's the formula that's been proven to work, and we're going to follow the formula. Oh, we're going to break the formula. Well, that's not proven by definition.
Right.
You got to take a chance at some point if you want to be original.
Yeah. And then I'll also recommend, so again, Christopher Guest, who is Nigel Tufnell in the band and the movie, not an exact copycat formula, but then he took that mockumentary format and ran with it, as Rob Reiner was doing other award-winning films like A Few Good Men and many others. I think, it was Sleepless in Seattle, not You've Got Mail. But he did the series of mockumentaries that started with Waiting for Guffman. My favorite of the whole series is Best in Show, which is like a parody of like the dog show competition world. A Mighty Wind, which is about folk music groups. Those I think Best in Show and A Mighty Wind are the best of Christopher Guest's work. And if This Is Spinal Tap hadn't made its way into production and release, he might not have had the inspiration to create those great films.
Right. Or the opportunity. So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, people want to check those out. Go see the movie. Go check on Spotify. Go listen to Spinal Tap or Frank Wess. And in the spirit of Spinal Tap, I hope your coffee is turned up to 11.
This cup of coffee was a sequel. It was okay compared to the first. I started with a nice pre-made cold brew over ice. That was probably the coffee highlighted the day, but I need to not be anywhere near 11 cups.
There you go. Probably too much. So have the right amount, whether it's 11 or not, up to you. And thank you to the listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. Fun as always.
Thank you.